Welcome to Fear Street.
A few years back, prior to becoming a law enforcement officer, I worked as a security guard at a hospital. Sounds cool, and it was, except for the fact that it was from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. I worked alone, and the hospital I guarded was abandoned. A year prior, the hospital built a brand new facility to replace their 5-story tall 1900s building. When the employees and patients left, they left everything in place. It looked like the people just disappeared in a hurry. Partially full coffee mugs, uniforms hanging on coat racks, wheelchairs in the halls, everything as it was, with a good coating of dust. I was always a third shift kind of person. I don't get night jitters or scare easily, but this place could do it to the best of them. Every night, I would walk through the halls that were supposed to be empty. Every night I would end up having to close doors and relock them. I'd walk one floor, move up to the next, and continue on. I got a little shaky when an hour after already walking a hallway, I'd have to turn off the same hall lights and close the same doors again in the building. Or when I'd be walking a hall and all of a sudden I'd hear footsteps on the floor above me. Doors opening and closing, elevators moving from floor to floor, phones ringing, nurse call lights going on, etc. There were 3 times in particular, though, that I didn't think I'd be able to take it anymore. The first time, I was checking offices on the 4th floor. There was a light on in a locked hallway. This hallway hadn't been renovated since the place was built, short of electricity, so everything was from the 1920s. I unlocked the door, flip the lights, walk out, relock the door, and turn to leave. Behind me, I hear the flip of a light switch. Through the frosted glass, I see that the lights are now back on. Needless to say, I left the hallway alone that night. The second time, I was riding an elevator between floors. I was taking it up to the top floor, when at about the 4th, I heard laughing and muffled talking. It kept getting louder as the elevator went higher. The elevator got up to the top floor, number 5. The doors swung open, and there was absolute silence. Of course, every light was on the floor, even in the patient rooms. I checked high and low. There was not a single living and breathing person in that place, except for me. The third time, and worst of all, it seemed to be just an average night. I was on the lower level, locking a door in a corridor. The door had a glass middle, but on the backside, it was covered by white tape. The room it led to was dark, and the hallway a few feet behind me was partially lit, so the glass acted like a perfect mirror. Everything was normal. I put the key in, the lock clicked, I turned the key, when behind me, I saw the full outline of a person walked past me in the hallway. Clear as day, just a full shadow of a person walked past. I froze, only for about a second, and then ran into the hall after the supposed person. There was no one, just silence. Other than that, it was an awesome gig, but after a year, it felt like I should have been an exorcist with all this stuff happening. The other guards that worked on the days opposite to mine had the same stuff happen, except they always saw nuns walking into rooms just outside of an old rectory on the 3rd floor. Better nuns than something else, I guess. Myself and a buddy on my squad responded to an alarm. The incident location was an old office-type building that had been converted to doctor's offices. There was a pharmacy attached to it. Our dispatch received a motion signal from an upstairs office. Keyholder arrived on scene and we went in to secure the building. The stairs were locked behind a door that, of course, the keyholder didn't have keys to. So we took the elevator up to the 2nd floor. The elevator opened to a pitch black hallway, except for one overhead light at the end of the hall. We started checking doors, and so far, all were secured. We got to the last office, and sure enough, the door was unlocked. We entered and observed it to be an unused office. The door opened to a sizable waiting room and reception area. There were about 10 to 12 exam rooms, all cleared with no hiccups. We exited the office, and immediately, something seemed off. That's when I realized the overhead light at our end of the hallway that had been on was now off, replaced by another light over by the elevators. I looked at my squad mate, and he was completely white. I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he says, "Weren't all those doors we just checked out closed and locked?" I tell him, "Yeah." So my buddy says, "Well, now they're all standing open." Sure enough, all the offices down the hallway we had just checked were now standing open. My heart's in my throat at this point. So we start clearing offices and securing them. We finished the last office, and on our way out, just before we turned the corner to get into the waiting area, the main door just slammed shut. Then our radios start going nuts with some kind of static feedback. At this point, I just want to get the hell out of there. We get back in the elevator and head down to the 1st floor to make contact with the key holder again. However, the key holder was nowhere to be found. I contacted dispatch and requested a callback number for the key holder so I could advise him of what we found. Dispatch stated that the key holder was still en route to us and was advising an ETA of 5 minutes. I advised dispatch that we'd already been out with the key holder. Dispatch requests I give them a call. I call dispatch, and she tells me that there's no way we were out there with a key holder. She states that the alarm company had only just made contact with one. Eventually, the real key holder arrived on the scene, and I asked her about the man that had let us in the building. She asked me to describe him, so I did. She stated that it sounded like one of the doctors that used to lease the office on the 2nd floor at the end of the hall. She then stated that he had passed away at his summer home several days ago. I love to be working on the police force, especially the night shift. I hated working the day shift because of all the nonsense that went on, and during the night, if there was anything that needed to be dealt with, it was usually very interesting. The alarms in the buildings that are connected with the base I was working at were set up in a way that they're all connected to the front desk, so if they were to go off, I'd know immediately. If the alarm is activated, then the base would be closed off and I'd go to the building and inspect it, pulling on the doors to see if I could get in, and then proceed to enter the building to secure it. One night, I was on patrol with my partner when we received a call that the alarm system was going off at an elementary school. My partner and I responded to the call and checked the entire school to make sure no one broke in. Once we had investigated the entire school, we called back to the base and informed them that the building was secure and there were no disturbances at the scene. We continued patrolling through the night, forgetting about the elementary school. 15 to 20 minutes later, after the first check of the building, my partner and I received another call that the alarm was going off at the same elementary school. We went back out to the school and found that the maintenance door was open, which led to the boiler room. We entered the doorway and investigated the room, secured it, closed the door, and locked it. We reported back to the desk that the building was all clear and secure, and continued on with our night. 20 minutes later, though, we got another call about the alarm going off. So we returned to the school, getting frustrated by this point, checked it, secured it, and called it into the desk and moved on with our night. Except we didn't go back to patrolling. We sat on opposite ends of the school and decided to watch it to see who kept attempting to break in. We sat there for hours on end and nothing happened. We decided we were going to leave soon. But while we were sitting there, the alarm started to go off again. It was around 3 a.m. now. I called the desk to ask if we could enter the building with the assistance of the building manager to ensure no one is inside of the school. The building custodian showed up a short while later, and all three of us entered the school and began to do a thorough walkthrough. We searched every classroom and every room in the school to make sure no one was hiding inside. During our walk, we discovered that another maintenance door was open, with the lights on inside of the room. We were all confused because this particular room was the size of a closet. We proceeded to walk down to the maintenance door and look inside, only to find no one was inside of it. However, as we were looking around in the room, we noticed a wet footprint on the floor. It was the footprint of a small child. All three of us got extremely freaked out because there were no reports of any missing children, and there was no way someone could have entered the school because all of the doors were locked and secure. We were baffled by finding the footprint because we were absolutely sure no one entered the building, and we had done a 3-hour sweep of the school that included looking in the ceiling tiles to make sure no one was hiding up there. No one was. I was a 911 dispatcher, and there was an elderly couple who lived in a rundown ranch house located about 20 miles away from the police station. Unfortunately, the husband passed away, leaving his wife to call the police station at least 3 times a week to help her with the small tasks that first responders normally don't respond to. She'd ask for help turning down the thermostat and boiling her water for her tea, and a few other small, simple tasks like that. Over time, the elderly woman developed dementia, and she started to believe she was calling 911 in order to reach her deceased husband and ask him for help. The rest of the dispatchers, myself included, soon gained recognition of her address when she'd call, even though she would only say her husband's name, that she needed help, and plead with him to come home and help her. One day, the elderly woman called the 911 dispatch line and only repeated the phrase, "Come home, I need your help. Please come home and help me." The first responders gathered their things and proceeded to her house, and when they arrived there, they found her lying dead in her bed. The first responders called back to dispatch and confirmed that the elderly woman did in fact call the dispatch line. As they investigated the house, they discovered that her heater was broken, and the average temperature in the house was about 50 degrees. So that's what the first responders wrote in their report about the strange death of this elderly woman. A year after the woman passed away, the 911 dispatch line continuously received phone calls from the elderly woman at the same exact address she had called from before. Vandals over time ruined her house, and eventually it burned to the ground, so the calls were unusual and unexplainable. Each time we received a phone call from the elderly woman asking her husband for help, they needed to go out there to make sure nothing was wrong on the property, and nothing was ever there. The phone company even confirmed that the phone line had been disconnected, but the calls were still coming from that same address, and no other. 10 years ago, I was working as a 911 dispatcher, and I received one of the creepiest calls I've ever taken while I was working one night. It was a cold and frigid night, indicating that it'd be a quiet shift. But around 3 a.m., my call box lit up green, and I proceeded to ask what the emergency was. The man on the other end of the line started to scream into the phone and exclaimed that he was still possessed by a demon that attempted to cut his heart out while he was sleeping. He then explained that he ran out of the room when the attack happened and locked himself inside of his bathroom. I was in disbelief and started to question the man to try to grasp a better understanding of what was going on in his home. Each time that the man tried to answer, though, I could hear banging and scratching coming from the bathroom door. The man whispered that there was a demon inside of his sister's body and that he'd been battling it for the past few days. Only this time, she finally broke free of the chains. The next thing I heard chilled me to the bone. An unrecognizable voice began taunting the man through the door. Except, it didn't sound like a 20-something-year-old woman. It sounded more like someone swallowed and gargled razor blades before speaking. She continued to growl and speak in an unknown language until the police arrived at their house. As the officers broke into the house, she let out a blood-curdling scream, and then the phone went silent. The call was then over, and I was left in shock. I looked over and saw my supervisor, who'd been listening to the call as well, pale white and speechless, after the line went dead. Before my shift ended, the commanding officer who responded to the call called and told me what he had found, and said that he'd have nightmares for the rest of his life. When the man exclaimed that his sister finally broke free of her chains, the officers found he wasn't kidding at all. When the officers entered the home, she had still had a chain tied around her body, with a bloody handcuff attached to her. Her body was covered in self-inflicted scratches, and one of her eyes had a popped blood vessel, making it bright red. The clothes she was wearing were completely shredded, and it looked like her body had been drained of all its blood. She was removed from the home and taken to the psych hospital, where she remained for a long time. Her brother appeared to be okay, except for a few gouges on his chest, and the police officers confirmed that she really did try to dig his heart out of his chest. I've been a police officer for over 10 years, and I've never been a believer of anything paranormal, until one day when I came across something I'd never forget. I was responding to an elderly lady who reported that she kept seeing this little girl run through her yard, and she was afraid that the little girl would vandalize something or something worse would happen to her. While I was driving to her house, it started to pour rain with lightning and thunder as well. When I arrived, she pointed me in the right direction of the yard where she'd been seeing the little girl, so I proceeded to check out the area. I looked around the yard and called out a few times to see if anyone was out there, but the only response I received was thunder. I made my way back to the house, and the elderly woman was now cowering and trembling in a corner, and exclaimed that the girl was inside of her house. I heard a thump in the house, and when I turned to investigate it, I saw a young girl who was about 13 years old. She ran from one side of the house to the other. I chased after her and commanded her to stop, but she somehow disappeared right in front of me. I thought my eyes were playing some type of trick on me, but the elderly woman called out that the girl was back outside in her yard. I turned to face a big window and saw the little girl running through the yard. I was in disbelief of how she got past me and made it outside so quickly. I ran outside immediately, only to have the little girl vanish once again. I searched for her, but found nothing, so I informed the woman that the little girl had run away because of the weather and that everything was going to be okay. A few months later, I found out that the elderly woman had passed away and there was a new family moving into the house. A short while after they moved in, dispatch received a phone call from the same address, claiming that there was a little girl running around in their yard and that she somehow got inside of their house. Back in the 90s, I was a police officer in a small rural town in Nebraska. We were patrolling the town during the winter. There were numerous abandoned houses in the town, but one was a hot spot for copper thieves, so we would heavily patrol it to make sure nothing else would get stolen from the house. At around 7 p.m., I drove around the house and had a clear view of all four sides, and I saw nothing was out of the ordinary. 2 hours later, I returned to the house and noticed that the back door was wide open. I knew the door wasn't open when I had driven by 2 hours ago, but what made it even stranger was that when I looked in the snow to see if there were any footprints leading up to the house, I found nothing. I called dispatch and informed them that I'd be investigating inside of the house and asked if a county sheriff would come along. I got out of my car, turned my flashlight on, and proceeded inside of the house. The house was completely gutted for the most part. The plaster walls were torn down. There were debris piles everywhere, and the house itself just looked like it was in shambles. There were no footprints inside of the house either, so I thought maybe the wind opened the door and was going to secure it when I heard a loud thump come from one of the rooms upstairs, and then heard children laughing. I informed the children of my presence and instructed them to come downstairs, but they continued to laugh and play upstairs. I informed dispatch of what I was hearing and went upstairs to talk to the kids. While I was checking out the rest of the house before moving upstairs, I heard 2 more loud thumps, and because there had been no response from the children, I started to assume it was an animal of some sort. As soon as I reached the top step, everything fell silent. The upper part of the house was relatively small, with a hallway at the top of the stairs, 1 bedroom to the right, 1 straight ahead at the end of the hall, and 1 on the left. When I started to look around, I heard a loud thump come from the bedroom on the left. I slowly looked around the door, only to discover that the room was empty, and the only thing inside was a pile of debris and wood. Upon further investigation of the room, I noticed that there was a page torn out of a children's book sitting on top of the pile of debris. What made it even stranger was that the page that was torn out had a police officer on it. I got creeped out, secured the rest of the house, locked the back door, and told dispatch that no one was inside of the house. I never returned to that house.